everyone. Welcome to the Family Office Network's webinar series. For today, my name is Lindsay Shuck. We have Richard Kane, CEO and founder, and Steve Wagman, COO and CFO with us from VeriJet. At the end of our presentation, we will have plenty of time for Q&A. There is a chat option feature for you to send your questions to, and we look forward to taking those questions. Richard and Steve, I'll let you take it from here.
Welcome. So pictured is our first jet, November 14 of Victor Juliet for VeriJet. This is the quietest, most fuel efficient, safest plane ever made, carbon fiber, parachute equipped, can land itself. We'll be talking in great detail about it. Help us complete the Series A, which requires 6 of these. Our first jet will be in the July-August timeframe, is already ordered. And this is the 25-year story of transforming the way people travel, unlocking the 4th wave of high-speed travel, reducing carbon footprint, using the appropriate equipment for flights. The industry that we're in, the private aviation industry, is broken. It's wildly inefficient. It can take hours to get a quote. There's an inability to respond to surges in demand. Even Thanksgiving creates issues. It can be impossible to get a transponder code south of Orlando the day before Thanksgiving, but then you add COVID and a staffing down on an emergency basis of air traffic control, and it destroys ATC, something that we saw coming. Our plane does not require ATC. It can fly extremely efficiently at low altitude without IFR clearances. It can self-separate traffic. Most importantly, it can use 5,400 airports because it's able to land on short runways. And that's very different than the heavy metal aircraft that are used. So rather than being in a traffic jam at Teterboro, we can fly from Essex, have an immediate departure. And I've literally flown over the waiting line of business jets at Teterboro. Everything you're trying to avoid happens at the larger congested hubs. We sidestep all of that, and we sidestep all the COVID problems. The infrastructure in the United States of private airports is spectacular, but it's only 1% utilized. The traffic is only 400 airports. The general public only knows 29 hubs. We can utilize 5,400 airports, get you close to your destination, reduce your ground travel time, and completely transform short-haul travel. The equipment that's used today is metal. Metal is subject to metal fatigue. You might think of Aloha Air and the skin of the airplane peeling off. We don't have that issue. We are carbon fiber. So we don't have to charge the 2-hour minimums that everyone else does for short-haul charter because the carbon fiber doesn't have that metal fatigue issue. More than that, though, the plane is remarkably fuel efficient even at low altitudes. It's single engine, single pilot with an engine designed for low altitude. So all the short haul trips where you can't climb to high altitude, where the average speed is only 247 knots, no matter how fast the airplane is, a Citation 10 that can go nearly supersonic is still 247 knots at short haul. So we get there in the same amount of time, burning tons less fuel, emitting tons less carbon, making much less noise, and at a fraction of the cost. In addition, the private aviation industry is very fragmented. 2,000 mom and pops, each with a handful of aircraft. A lot of markups, a lot of brokers that are in the middle, and all of that gets fixed. And of course, VeriJet is the way to fix that, using the right equipment for the right flights, better for the environment, better for the operators, better for the end user customers. 2 drivers for this. We have an AI that's been routing the best floating fleets of jets in the United States for the last decade, saving 200,000 pounds of carbon a week, 7% of their operating costs. And we've built a marketplace for the trading of private flights. Been wildly successful. It again reduces carbon for the industry, but what pops up is the lack of equipment to fly short haul until our project. And we have a 7-year exclusive with that marketplace. So for the category single engine jet, VeriJet will be the only partner in the marketplace. And this marketplace gives us ASAP requests, emergency requests, recovery requests. The partners in the marketplace are flying jets that were designed in the 60s and built in the 80s and break all the time. And part of what we're doing is just recovering those flights, recovering something called an AOG, or aircraft on the ground. Then we have the Cirrus Vision Jet. It's a proven airframe. It has the lowest operating cost of all light jets. It's been the most delivered jet 2 years in a row, and it won the Collier Trophy. That's given to the best advance in aviation aerospace. You pretty much have to build a lunar lander to win that trophy, and the Vision Jet won that trophy. So basically, one engine, one pilot versus two engines, two pilots, heavy metal versus carbon fiber, we're half the operating cost. That's what this project comes down to. And every time you fly one of these jets, you're saving 1 ton of CO2 footprint compared to the next light jet. But we've frequently seen things like Gulfstreams flying from Santa Monica to Las Vegas, and now it's 9 tons of CO2 and 1/9 the cost, 2,500 instead of 25,000. Radical noise reduction. That V-tail deflects the noise up and away. When this plane goes by in an air show, you can't hear it. The crowd has to hush to hear this plane. And as I touched upon earlier, the lowest CO2 footprint. Beyond all this, though, Williams certified for us 2 years ago that the engine can run on 4 different types of biofuel. That biofuel can make us carbon zero, even carbon negative. If we stop burning the sugarcane in the Everglades and turn it into biodiesel, blue biofuel, for example, in West Palm is doing that, you now save the pollution of burning the sugarcane fields. You know, they don't burn the sugarcane fields in Brazil. I think we're the last country that maybe does this en masse. And instead you turn it into jet fuel and you're carbon zero. If you make your jet fuel from engineered blue-green algae, you're carbon negative. So we have the opportunity to go carbon zero. We flew 26 celebrities, sports managers, CEOs of carbon-aware companies like Beyond Meat at Santa Monica, showing them the noise, the carbon, and the opportunity to run on biodiesel. We even had it catered by a vegan food truck. This is a very powerful environmental statement. Basically, it's at least 1 ton of CO2 every hop that you fly this. We're addressing the short haul market. That's a $7.5 billion market, just measuring the turboprops and the small cabins, a little bit over 2 million flight hours a year. And we are a trading partner in the best e-marketplace in the US. The companies that have logos, we have real-time electronic feeds with. The other companies, we have a data transfer bulletin board. That's 2,000 other companies. So emergency request, ASAPs, aircraft on the ground, and then changes for efficiency. So these partners, when they are oversold, they have to buy a lift from somebody else. The years that NetJets loses money, it's because they bought $400 million of lift from other operators. My operators tend to white label. So if you looked at a JetLynx or a Delta, you wouldn't find JetLynx or Delta customers in the top 10 volume. You would find Apollo Jets, you would find NetJets. They were willing to trade flights. That's why we standardized on them. VeriJet is just another client for this marketplace. It gives us the ability to electronically place our flights, and we can replace inappropriate equipment with a Vision Jet, saving carbon, but also freeing up the larger jets to do what they're supposed to do, which is fly high and cross the country. Now, the COVID impacts here, we're seeing more ASAP requests, more emergency requests, fewer requests booked 2 weeks out, more requests of the flavor of, we need to be there in the next couple of days, get us the best price. We are absolutely the best positioned company to do that. Built into the DNA of VeriJet is the ASAP emergency request, because that's what we're built on. We've been recovering the King Air that broke with all these other operators. And conversely, if VeriJet has a Vision Jet go down, we can recover it with our SR-22, which I'll talk about in a bit, or we can dispatch another operator. So there's a lot of advantages to being in the marketplace. From a financial perspective, it de-risks the entire project. We know, we understand the demand, we're optimizing all these other fleets, we're creating the demand for ourselves, and we're the most efficient, lowest cost opportunity out there. So as a coastal partner, even if we have to reposition our low-cost airplane, we're still still the number one choice. It enables B2B without us having the risk of collecting payment, without us having any kind of spend for marketing, and we have an exclusive 7-year locking that up. The coastal marketplace is about 10% of the national market, about 60,000 flights a year, $540 million of opportunity. Beyond that, there's 2,000 additional sources. In the 15 minutes I've been talking, there's 2 emergency requests in our operating area for lift, a couple of passengers, a couple of dogs. Perfect for us. The history of this, companies used to own their aircraft entirely. Then you had the GM executives flying to Washington in 4 separate business jets, and that fell out of favor slightly. Then you have fractional like NetJets or FlecJets. Then you have membership cards. You have member programs like Sentient and Wheels Up. And finally, you have us on demand. So everyone to the left of us has painted themselves into a corner. They've sold a fraction, they've sold a membership card, and they have to provide service. So when they're oversold because there's Thanksgiving or COVID or a plane went down, they need to buy lift from everybody else. VeriJet, on the other hand, can be very selective on the trips that we choose. We can discount trips that make us more efficient. We can put price premiums on trips that take us out of regions when we don't have a plane in position. It gives us an ability to operate at unheard of EBITDA and margins. Later, Steve will walk you through some of those things. This is truly a 25, 30-year project. It starts with NASA and the Small Aircraft Transportation System. I was at the organizing conference for that in Danville, Virginia. It proceeds to the coastal marketplace. We've been running that for 11 years with spectacular results. Based on the efficiency gains of that marketplace, I've been placed on the board of the Lindbergh Foundation to talk about carbon and noise, and we'll touch again on that in a bit. Then you have the Cirrus Vision Jet. In the follow-up, you're going to have a link to a video. I promise you it is one of the most astonishing videos you will see this year. Give it about 30 seconds. The first 30 seconds are dry, and then it's completely riveting. Basically, passengers can press a button, and this plane lands itself without a pilot. It's the part of our single engine, single pilot certification. This is also the plane with a parachute that will let the airplane descend gently to the ground. It's got incredible redundancy of safety systems. I can literally speak for an hour on those safety systems. And finally, there's VeriJet, the realization of this 25-year plan. So very briefly, we went from horses to cars and got 75 miles an hour. And from cars to jets, from cars to props, 200 miles an hour. Props to jets, 500 miles an hour. And then with TSA, 9/11, hub and spoke, we're back down to 75 miles an hour. And that's the time to drive to the airport, go through TSA, connect, drive on the other side. Every time you double the speed of travel, you change out the underlying tech. So less than a decade from the first car to the last horse in Manhattan. That's what we're talking about, a revolution in how people travel short haul. The general public, they only know these 29 hubs, but we can manage 5,400 airports. 98% of our population live within 20 miles of one or more of these. You're flying direct to your destination. You're flying there without TSA. It's impossible to get to your flight 15 minutes before takeoff the way it used to be. And with this, you can walk up to a private terminal and walk onto the airplane 15 minutes before your flight. There's no time to touch on what made this possible, but the last piece of this 25-year plan, ADS-B, Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast, went into law and effect January 1st of this year. That's one of the things that lets us bring planes safely to these small airports. We're also talking about an airplane that can see in the dark. So that sounds odd, but when you have adverse weather or there's a deer on this remote runway, those things pop out and you avoid all sorts of issues. So you can safely use this whole national framework. Finally, What's pictured here is the Williams prototype. Williams is our engine maker. Again, they're the folks that let us run the biodiesel. We can run that biodiesel without any impact to our cost, maintenance schedule, or inspections. But more than that, this is a 15-year-old plane. It was optimized with a flight deck for single pilot. It's a single engine. It's radically efficient. This will give you an idea of how long we've been working on this as an industry with NASA, with Williams, with Cirrus, and the impact that it will have. We have a patent on the booking of air travel by street address. It's what unlocks these 5,400 airports. I'm a commercial instrument rated pilot. I was flying in the Southeast in my home market. I was going to our trade show, the National Business Aircraft Association trade show in Atlanta, and I didn't know what airport to land at. Atlanta's ringed by 5 airports. I didn't know what was closest to the convention center. I didn't know what was closest to my hotel. And so a light bulb went off. If I don't know this, being a commercial pilot in my home region, the general public has no chance. They know Hartsfield and that's about it. They might not know Peachtree DeKalb. So that is what unlocks this travel. You're literally booking point-to-point travel and you're getting 300 miles an hour instead of 75 miles an hour. So what does that mean for people? Well, you're closer. You're not having 20, 40-mile drives on each side of your trip. That's a big portion of the increase in speed here. With 9/11, with hub and spoke, with TSA, flights of 300 nautical or less are just impractical. You end up driving. Yet 54% of all flights in the US are short haul, defined as less than 700 nautical. And then you have SARS, MERS, COVID, seasonal flu. With that, you have severe shortages of private lift. The emergency requests with 2 people trying to get out of the Dominican Republic, they'd like to go to DC, they'll let you take them to any US airport at any time in any plane at any price point, kind of underscores sort of the tragedy of all this and the inability to meet those requests. And that's what VeriJet's all about. We actually want to accelerate our Series A, get more planes here to meet this incredible demand that we're seeing. Specifically, our response to COVID, we will UV sterilize the aircraft between flights. This is a combination of UV light and ozone. 5 minutes would do it. We're going to bake it for 15 minutes. You put this thing in the airplane, you close up the doors, and you hit a remote control, and you come back in 15 minutes, and it's completely, perfectly sterilized. Of course, we are a per airplane model. We're not per seat. The only thing that could get close to us, not for convenience, but for cost, was the per seat models. So a Surf Air or a Wheels Up where you're a party bus and there's 11 seats with 10 strangers. We don't do that. We've always been about the entire airplane. Just happens it works with COVID. Our pilots will have medical wearables that will tell them and tell us about increases in temperature. They'll be screened carefully. But beyond that, our crews come home at the end of the day, at the end of the week. They're not staying in hotels. They're not taking airliners to their next assignment. So that really limits their COVID exposure. Pictured is the SR-22 piston. The jet is actually the step-up plane for the piston. We'll again talk more about the piston. Both of these are parachute equipped. Both will be offered in our fleet. The piston will carry 3 people. Short haul about the same speeds as the jet, a third of the cost of the jet, a third of the fuel burn of the jet. We use it as our trainer and our time builder, but it lets us move our crews home. We can also recover jet passengers if there's an issue. The whole nature of the game has changed because of COVID. There's the FAA outages. There's this emergency flavor of the requests now, ASAP requests. Another one just came in, and I can see this in the corner of my eye here. And that's always been in our DNA. We're dispatched by AIs. The AIs react immediately to changes in our schedule. No one else has that tech. Within VeriJet is a proprietary AI that manages that. And then the FAA outages. So JFK went down, Fort Lauderdale, ground control went down, Palm Beach went down. It started out west, where they have to evacuate entire ATC centers because of COVID. And we knew that would happen a month ago, planned for it, because of ADS-B, because of our jets, because that single engine is still hyper efficient below 18,000, we can fly in perfect safety without ATC guidance. My personal belief is we're looking at a decade of impact. Now that people are more aware of the seasonal flu, they're not going to want to fly through a hub in a tube with a bunch of strangers, and we can give them a better price point to do that. In fact, we're lowering the price point of private aviation to make this happen. So where this starts, we start with the coastal marketplace. We can electronically place our flights on the coastal marketplace. There's no cost of sales. But where it goes is very, very different. One of our board members, Peter Diamandis, was the keynote speaker to Expedia Group. He was there to explain how they can avoid disruption. And then he pointed to me and said, Richard has your answer, and VeriJet is that answer. Basically booking point to point between hundreds of city pairs where there's no direct service. And we have an agreement with Expedia to open a tab for us to book. More recently, Peter has suggested Uber. Now, you may know the CEO from Expedia went to Uber. We're tied to Uber at the highest levels, and we also participate in Uber Elevate. So it may make more sense to have Uber be the booking partner. The underlying point, though, you have to answer these travel portals in 200 milliseconds. VeriJet is the only company that can do that. We have our own proprietary AI built on top of Coastal's marketplace that lets us answer in 200 milliseconds. We'll also have our own brand and our own portal pictured there. So you'll be able to book with an app or a website directly as that happens. But basically, it's an alternative to airline travel. So to make this practical in Southeast, if you have 3 attorneys that are traveling from Palm Beach to Tallahassee, they can't get there directly. They're going through Charlotte, they're going through Key West. They're paying at least $500 a seat, but we've seen it as high as $18.50 a seat. And then they can't get home the same day. So that you're getting 3 hotel rooms, you're getting a rental car. The total cost of traveling for these 3 professionals to their job site on VeriJet is below what commercial would be. This is a game changer. This is the first time that we're not taking and cannibalizing passengers from other operators. We're instead cannibalizing first class on American or business class on American or Delta. My exit plan pre-COVID was always to cause so much damage to the short haul business for people connecting through Chicago or Atlanta that one of those airlines has to buy us. And I figured we'd be United Private Jets. And while that might sound ludicrous to you, keep in mind that we've been running Delta Private Jets for years. And Delta Private Jets will take passengers off of airline first class and put them on a private jet when the stars line up. So it's not as far-fetched as it might sound. Post-COVID, we'll see what happens. But the airline pricing for this short haul, they charge you more per mile for the inconvenience of connecting than they do flying you direct across the country. So this is the actual opportunity. We're not talking dozens of jets, but hundreds and thousands at this point. Now we do need to talk about point-to-point travel. Picture it as the Lilium jet, but it could be the Uber platform. It could be the Hyundai Uber. There's probably 2 dozen that will fit the bill, but they can take you without any carbon emission from your downtown rooftop to your airport. In this case, from Brickell to Fontainebleau Aviation at Opa-locka. We have the landing spots set aside for these VTOLs. We have parking for a couple of jets at Opa-locka, and now you're in Tallahassee in under 2 hours. And if you want to pay the differential on the Jet A versus the biodiesel, you can do this carbon zero, and of course you're home the same day. Incredible savings of time, cost, and carbon footprint. We have 16,000 pilots of the propeller-driven SR-22. Our certificate is for both fleet types. These pilots can train at 16 gallons an hour. The control layouts are identical with no training in the Vision Jet, but with 3,000 hours in the SR-22, I was able to take off, land, and deal with weather in the full motion Vision Jet simulator. That's how identical the controls are. There was only one control I couldn't find. It was dark in the simulator and I couldn't find the landing gear switch. And that's because the SR-22 is fixed gear. It goes 180 knots fixed gear, incredibly efficient. This is a competitive weapon for us. In pre-COVID days when there was a pilot shortage, this lets us train our pilots at 16 gallons an hour, move them into a single engine jet. We don't have to train them in twins that were built in the 80s and are dangerous. This was a huge, still is a huge competitive advantage for us. But now that we can get our pilots home every evening and then we can build our pilots up to airline transport pilot standards and recover our aircraft on the ground events, this framework lets us be hyper competitive. So our first launch point is in the Southeast. Our investors in Santa Monica, and by the way, the Series A closed on one of the worst days of the stock market in at least since '87, if not ever. 2 people completed their Series A paperwork and sent in funds. It was a great affirmation of our project. And they would like us to be in Santa Monica because that's where they are. In fact, Peter wants to know when his jet will be at Santa Monica waiting for him. But the data tells us the Southeast. About 80% of the US population is a 2-hour flight from Tennessee. We have 11 years of all of the data for the best operators in the United States, and it screams the Southeast to us. In addition, the training, maintenance, parts facility for Cirrus, the main one, is in Tennessee. So with this, I'm going to turn the deck over to Steve Wagman, our CFO, COO.
Great, thank you, Richard. So this next slide reflects our 5-year plan. Some of the key points on this slide include closing our Series A round in the second quarter of 2020, followed up with an order for up to 6 aircraft, receiving our FAA Part 135 air carrier and operator certificate in the third quarter of 2020, and commencing VeriJet revenue service in the fourth quarter of 2020. In addition, achieving EBITDA positive results in 2021, operating between 6 and 8 aircraft with approximately $15 million of revenue. And our plan is to grow our fleet by December 2023, operating 48 aircraft, 12 in each region of the US as we look at it, Southeast, Northeast, then Central, then West. On to the next slide. 2024 marks our first full year of operations at 48 aircraft and generating targeted $164 million in revenue at rates between $2,500 and $3,000 per flight hour. Our AI drives efficiencies together with significantly reducing our sales and marketing spend, as Richard commented on earlier. A few call outs on this slide include operating the business at a 54% gross margin, a 50% EBITDA margin, and a 41% pre-tax margin. Going a little bit deeper on the next slide, we're talking about our business model. As we grow our fleet, our business model scales very well based on revenue grows much faster than our expenses. And in addition to that, more aircraft translate into higher utilization rates with fewer repositioning flights or dead legs, in which case, on a dead leg, the cost of moving the aircraft around is borne by the operator. So the next slide is a summary of our Series A. We launched a $12.5 million Series A offering earlier this year in advance of COVID. We had a first closing, as Richard mentioned, in early March timeframe. There's a pre-money value at $12.5 million. The proceeds from this offering plus debt financing will be used to acquire up to 6 aircraft and also for general working capital purposes. As VeriJet is an LLC, the offering includes the issuance of Class A units, which have tax benefits, including expanded rights relative to bonus depreciation on the aircraft which we purchase from this Series A. Together with the Class A units will have liquidation rights, preemptive rights, reg rights, and drag-along rights. Any additional information on the Series A financing is available upon request. Thank you. Now I'm going to turn it back over to you, Richard.
So we have an incredible board of directors. We have Peter Diamandis. He's the founder of X Prize, of Singularity University, 26 commercial enterprises, best-selling author. In fact, let me just give him a plug. You should definitely read the books Abundance and Bold, and The Future is Faster Than You Think if you're running a family office. These will bring you up to speed on exponential technologies. He opens doors for us. If I want to go see Airbus, Peter will take us into Airbus, for example. We have Eric Lindbergh. Eric Lindbergh is the executive chairman of the Lindbergh Foundation. He's Charles Lindbergh's grandson. I am on the board of the Lindbergh Foundation. Eric's on our board. It's because the foundation, to the run-up of the 100th anniversary of Charles Lindbergh's flight, is championing radical decarbonization and radical noise reduction of private flying. It matches exactly what VeriJet has established. Eric, myself, Greg Marianak, a few other folks from XPRIZE will also be steering a very, very large carbon sequestration XPRIZE, pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. Of course, you've got 3 pilots steering it, so we're going to be steering it towards jet fuel. David Treitel, he's leased a couple of $1 billion of aircraft with Apollo Leasing. We are casting the shadow of a giant airline with this board. That Dave Treitel leases fleets of aircraft to airlines should give you an idea of where we're heading. And then Mark Kahn. Mark was on the Civil Aeronautics Board working on airline deregulation alongside Phil Bakes, who has been on the board of Coastal, and he's the former CEO of Eastern and Continental. Mark is the founder of Spirit Airlines, a co-founder of Spirit. He's a senior counsel at HCH Legal, and he's an adjunct professor at American University. And then myself, founder of Coastal Aviation a decade ago. I have patents on AI, aviation, aerospace, safety and dispatch, things that have been cited by the industry leaders. And of course, we talked about that AI that's presently routing the fleets of aircraft. Bottom center, you have Peter, and off of Peter's right shoulder is the Spirit of St. Louis. Off of my left shoulder, out of the picture, is the X-15, the first plane to go twice the speed of sound. The orange plane is the Bell X-1, first plane to go Mach 1 with Chuck Yeager. The spaceship is Spaceship 1. Below us is the Apollo capsule. Spaceship 1 is the spaceship that was engineered for the XPRIZE. It was the winner of the XPRIZE. When you have been part of a project that puts a aircraft in the Milestones of Flight gallery on the mall in DC, you feel you can assemble this team and start an airline. Pictured on the bottom left is the XPRIZE Cup. After XPRIZE had been won, Peter wanted something for the teams to continue. And so he painted a few years before the event, that painting on the left. On the right is the actual photo of the event. He's someone who can envision the future and then create it. The tagline being the easiest way to predict the future is to create it. And that's what we routinely do. So that's this board. Again, we're casting the shadow of a giant airline because that's what we want to be. Steve Wagman, who you've heard from today, he's been a public officer, C-suite in public companies. He has participated in a 135 charter operation with Piaggio turboprops, efficient, high speed, things that should sound familiar by now. Steve Clements, co-founder of Virgin America, helped with the FAA paperwork with Virgin and 6 other carriers. He's a 15,000-hour pilot. He flew Virgin America's first flight as a 777 captain. We have this phenomenal team. When we went in front of the FAA, we were allowed to bring 5 executives and they bring 5 examiners. Every one of the 5 on our side of the table had experience in safety systems. For example, I helped build the safety systems for 2 of the bigger charter fleets, and I have safety patents. Steve Wagman's worked on the safety systems of Avant Air. Steve Clements wrote the safety systems and was director of training for Virgin. They've never seen the level of firepower that we brought. Then they watched the safe return video. Again, that's the video that you need to see after this presentation, and were blown away. And we ended up with 3 extra examiners and support to launch at scale. So a lot more interesting than what they usually have. Let's take some King Airs and start a charter operation. And then the Vision Jet. So the Collier Trophy, again, that's an incredible achievement on the level of building a lunar lander. The most delivered business jet a couple of years in a row. Cirrus, by the way, has been the best-selling aircraft for 14 years with their single-engine piston aircraft. All of these parachute equipped and everything. This is the interior of our jet. What you see pictured is the executive configuration. This is the Gulfstream level amazing experience. We have taken institutional investors who were pessimistic, who flew to see us in their Gulfstreams, flew to Fort Lauderdale Executive, got in this plane, and the ride quality was just as good, if not better, but the visibility out the windows blew them away. And this very grumpy institutional guy, we put him at the controls in the right seat. The first 5 minutes, he had trouble suppressing his grin. And before we landed, he asked to join our board. So it's a transformational experience. You know, with COVID, it's difficult for us to dispatch a jet, but I promise you, we've flown now 40 civilians. They've all loved it. We are 40 for 40. Pictured at the bottom left are the different seating arrangements. So there's 28 possible seating arrangements. This becomes the family cruiser to the Hamptons for the weekend, putting some kids in the back. The pilots can change these seating configurations in 5 minutes with no paperwork. So it is a machine for multi-use, multi-purpose. Again, radically quiet, radically efficient. We've talked about the parachute system. We've talked about the turbine engine a bit. We haven't talked about stability protection. This plane will not let you lose control of the aircraft. It keeps you in control. It tells you where the mountains are. It tells you where the weather is. It is astonishing. There's actually, I'm fairly certain nothing safer has ever been built. And then the flight training that comes with this plane, there's a full motion simulator. It's about a $25 million piece of equipment. No one will be flying our passengers without a type rating in this jet and an airline transport pilot certificate. So these are airline experienced personnel flying a plane that keeps them safe. We don't have much time to talk about it, but on the ground, this plane knows where it is. And if you know some of the history of aviation, the reason we have a 1,500-hour requirement now is a 2-person flight crew lined up on the wrong runway that was too short, and unfortunately it had some tragic results. Another incident was on the ground where 2 747s collided. All of that goes away with this feature called Safe Taxi. It knows where it is, it knows the appropriate runway. That, the infrared, the envelope protection, the integrated training, we are going to be the safest, most efficient, most cost effective, most carbon friendly, most noise friendly thing on the planet, delivering this amazing on-demand service and taking everyone from 75 to 300 miles an hour. Then add COVID and it changes the game and doubles down on everything we're doing. So that's our presentation. I think at this point we can open it up to questions.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Steve. For those of you that have questions, please utilize your chat option so we can read your question aloud and answer accordingly.
So in the interim, I'm going to tell a story. Esther Dyson is the daughter of the physicist Freeman Dyson. She was the first angel investor into coastal aviation. She's a New Yorker. She doesn't drive. She was in Naples and she had to deliver a keynote speech in Orlando. And she requested a quote from NetJets and EXO, Paul Tao at EXO at the time, from SatSair, from 3 or 4 other companies. And they all took her to Orlando International. And her hotel was 7 minutes from Kissimmee. We were able to land at Kissimmee because there's no commercial service. I was able to dispatch carry limousine onto the ramp. They put down a red carpet. We moved her bags from the plane to the limo, and she was at her hotel in 7 minutes. And I flew that flight for her. And then we attended her conference flight school for the aerospace charter air taxi industry. And I was on a panel with all of those CEOs. And she pointed out that they took her to the wrong airport with jet fuel costing $1 or $2 more a gallon, tying up their equipment 30 minutes more, and putting her in traffic for more than an hour. And the CEO of SatSair then stood up and said, we won't make that mistake anymore because we've just signed with Coastal. So I tell this story to just emphasize how important the booking of air travel by street address and the geographic and drive time knowledge is in selecting that airport. And with the VisionJet, we have access to all of those airports. So it truly is about increasing the speed of travel.
Great, thank you. Do you guys, Richard, do you see the questions or did you want me to read them aloud for you?
I'm sorry, I'm not seeing the questions.
Okay, no problem. Looks like Curtis has a question. How large is your fleet of VisionJets?
So the Series A gets us 6 jets, but in addition to the Series A, we've also been doing some debt financing. And our first jet is actually outside the Series A. So that would be 7. We expect to do 4 or 5 jets this year on debt and 6 on the Series A for 10 total. 48 jets by year 3. We already have our first airplane. It's an SR-22. Now, with the extraordinary demand with COVID, we would like to accelerate that acquisition of the 48 jets to this year because we have all of this ASAP demand. I watched the negotiation between a family and a broker, and the family had about $9,000 and wanted a private jet flight, and the broker, the lowest they could go was $16,400. And it was heartbreaking, and it was some sort of medical emergency, likely COVID related. The flight that they were negotiating over, VeriJet would have flown at 40% EBITDA for $5,000. That's how much we're lowering the price point. That's how much this service is needed right now. That's how much demand there is. So help us with the Series A, help us with some debt financing, and we'll just hit it out of the park and add more planes this year.
Perfect. Okay, next question. Are you US only? What about Asia and Europe?
So we have the CEO, former CEO of EasyJet, former CEO of JetBird, ready to operate 60 or 70 aircraft out of Cologne, Germany, to revolutionize air travel in Europe. I use that term because you could find an Irish Times article about JetBird and doing exactly that of Cologne. Flash forward, and that would be the Vision Jet out of Cologne, Germany. We do not have plans for Asia yet. In particular, the private charter marketplace in China has been slow to develop. You can buy a plane, but you have to give it to a state-owned operation, and that's changing, and we would see tremendous opportunity there as well, and would be pleased to go in that direction. But right now, US and Europe. Incidentally, Europe, right out of the blocks, is 15% more efficient, 15% more efficient than we are, because of the density of the city pairs and the population centers. So that's an even easier place for us to operate than the Southeast US.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, next question from Vikram. What happens if the single jet fails?
So first of all, the single engine jet is 8 to 12 to 16 times more reliable than the single engine turboprop. So if you're familiar with the PC-12, which is arguably the world's most successful charter airplane, we're anywhere from 8 to 16 times more reliable than that. You can make the case that we're more reliable than the twin engine turboprop King Air. I am a PT-6 pilot. I've flown the North Atlantic in a PT-6 and trusted it with my life. Those are very reliable. We're 8 to 16 times more reliable. If it fails, the plane has tremendous gliding ability, and we can land at all of those small airports. When we are at altitude in this plane, we'll have our choice of 20 airports. But if all of that fails, you pull a red handle and a parachute just lowers the whole plane gently to the ground. It's like something out of a James Bond movie. If the pilot is incapacitated, the passengers press a button, the plane selects the airport, looks at the weather, looks at the terrain, lands itself, calls for help for the pilot, and shuts down the airport all on its own, while giving comfort and solace to the passengers, explaining we'll be on the ground in 5 minutes, in 3 minutes, that kind of stuff. So multiple options. The only question that ever stumped me is what happens if you ingest a bird on takeoff? And I actually didn't know the answer, so I talked to Cirrus about it. If you look at the picture of the plane, you see that there's a bubble in the passenger compartment. That bubble directs the air in a way that a bird literally can't be sucked into the engine. It's an inertial separator. On takeoff, you have a high deck altitude and the engine is shielded. In cruise, the airflow protects the engine. Compare that to an airliner where there are like 2 big bird vacuums hanging under the wings. It's actually a radically safer design. The engine is monitored probably 1,000 times a second, at least 100 times a second. If we are going to have a failure, we know it in advance. We don't take off, we divert in the air to maintenance. So I don't know of a Williams engine failure, period, but we'll detect any kind of degradation of the engine well ahead of a failure point. Once these things start spinning, it's not like a piston engine where you're burning oil and trying to keep the thing from vibrating apart. It just spins and rotates. It's very few moving parts in that regard. It's amazing technology. So, did that answer your question?
He's going to be on mute, but Vikram, if you have any further questions regarding that, please go ahead and send a follow-up. We have another question from Doug. How does the model differ from VeriJet?
That is a great question. So I knew Ed Iacobucci. The day before I launched Coastal, I gave him a heads up that we were going to give a better AI to all of his competitors and let them trade flights, as opposed to VeriJet's internal system, which wouldn't trade flights with anybody. They wanted to be the one and only airline. And they set up a hub and spoke system. Hub and spoke, you might remember, is the thing we want to replace. This is actually the 787 versus the A380 argument. Do you want to go point to point, or do you want to put everyone in one big commuter car and fly them? So on VeriJet, you were per seat. If you wanted to go off the grid, you can take the whole airplane, but it was very, very expensive. What they did was recreate an airline, and we're trying to basically get rid of an airline experience and have you go direct point to point. So VeriJet had these things called dayports. Now, what's really funny about this is I flew the supplies for their Pensacola or their Gainesville dayports because their Eclipse jets couldn't actually carry the paper, the brochures, and the people. So I flew them in my PT6 turboprop because I could carry more weight. And I really wanted VeriJet to succeed. I even flew the governor and lieutenant governor of Florida on some campaign stops to show them the use of private aviation that led to VeriJet getting their certification to fly state employees. I mean, I really did want them to succeed, but they chose the wrong airplane. The Eclipse was terrible for this market. It had small windows, it was cramped, it was confined. To do that per seat was ridiculous. The first Eclipse jets that were shipped, and I know you won't believe this, but I promise you it's true, you had to glue a compass onto the dashboard to make them legal to fly because the avionics didn't work. You couldn't fly them in weather or in ice. And if you look into the deep history of this, you can find that they sometimes had to divert to the Bahamas because they couldn't land in Florida due to weather. So wrong airplane. I could talk for a couple of hours on the difference in the math models. Ours is better, proven in the industry, saves a few 100,000 pounds of carbon a week. Theirs was a bunch of academic geeks from Georgia Tech, ant farmers, if you are familiar with the project. Great people, but they didn't have the operational experience. The AI that powers this comes from the Inc. 500 company Coastal, where we routed 100 million calls per hour, 14 billion calls a month, all while the phone was ringing in near real time. On a massive supercomputer 480 CPU system, it's like using a sledgehammer on a gnat when we're talking about a few thousand flights. The VeriJet AI, if you want to call it that, the VeriJet platform ran on a single box and would calculate for 6 hours a night while they shut down their reservation system. So totally different class of AI firepower. Incredible difference in the aircraft. The VisionJet's a proven product. We waited till the generation 2, which is quieter, it goes higher, it goes further, to launch this company because we wanted the perfect charter platform. And again, I can talk for another hour on VeriJet, but it's night and day differences.
Okay, perfect. And it looks like Phil and Chuck have a similar question. What is the maximum range?
So roughly 1,250 miles. And if you want to put 2 people and take them nonstop to Boston, we could do it. But keep in mind that we're playing unfairly. We are going for every possible advantage. And our advantage is when you're doing a short haul trip, say Palm Beach to Nassau or Santa Monica to Las Vegas, you can't climb high. There's no time to climb high. So you're down at 18,000, 19,000 feet. So a lot of people ask, what about the Honda Jet? And the Honda Jet is efficient when you're at 41,000 feet and when they let you climb directly to 41,000 feet. At 19,000 feet, not so much. It's got 2 thirsty engines. It's metal. It's down low. It's burning fuel. It loses its range. So we are incredibly more efficient than anything else out there to where we can be a third of the price point and still have 48% EBITDA when we're at low altitude, and that's short haul. So we figure 600 or 700 nautical. Now, if an investor of the family office networks has participated in the Series A, and this is a real example, wants to take their grandmother from Vero Beach to White Plains, we'll do that all day. And we'll do that for them and we'll give them priority handling. But when we want to play unfairly and win every time, we're going to keep it to short haul because that's where single engine, single pilot trumps anything that's two engine and metal.
Okay, perfect. Let's see. We have time for a few more questions, so I'm kind of just trying to get through them as quickly as I can here. Let's see. Which investment bank is helping you for the Series A raise?
That is Mark Schulte and Rosen Co. And Steve, feel free to jump in and provide color if you like.
Mark has extensive aviation background. He's been helping us in the last several months, formerly with Cowan, with Merrill, and actively involved in supporting us. And we can provide his information to anybody who is seeking more information there.
Okay, perfect. Let's see. We have time for one more question, and I'm just kind of, give me a second here.
Oh, I found the questions now. Wow, there are a lot of questions. People actually paid attention. This is cool. Thank you, everybody.
Do you see any questions in there that I missed, Richard?
So, I mean, the easy ones, golf trips. The tail actually holds a number of golf clubs. Our demo pilot is a PGA Touring pro, Scott Boshart. He flies demos for us. People love him, but then he also plays the PGA Tour, which is hilarious, and takes the different sets of golf clubs. Another easy one, the Northeast market is phenomenal. I used Teterboro and Essex as an example, but you know, you have weather and de-icing and delays and you know, the Northeast probably is the second strongest market for short haul. For overall charter, it is the best market in the US, but keep in mind, we're playing an unfair game of 600 nautical or less. But it's inevitable we'll be doing Boston, New York, Chicago, DC.
Perfect. I think that seems like maybe most of our questions. We're kind of running out of time. Do you see any more, Richard?
Well, there's one for dead legs. This is tough to answer quickly, but I'm going to try it. Our AI is in the business of getting rid of dead legs. So if you know the industry, you know a company called JetSmarter. JetSmarter started by buying the empty legs from another company, Travel Management Corp. We got Travel Management Corp to stop selling off their empty legs because that pinned their fleet days in advance. So if the revenue trip canceled, they were still stuck flying empty Bozeman, Montana flights. The alternative is to dynamically reoptimize with every flight request, with every AOG broken airplane, and manage out the empty legs. And then when you've made a carrier as efficient as possible, then you swap trips with other carriers and get rid of empty legs further. The net result is a $1 billion plus valuation company, JetSmarter, got liquidated for 20 million in equity, no cash, because we dried up the source of their empty legs. It's that powerful a game-changing technology. The AIs that, you know, can deal with 100 million calls an hour, make short work of empty legs and the whole market around that. So we've changed the industry's focus. And then VeriJet just sits on top of that and has a field day.
If I could intercept for a second, this is Steve here, and I see one question just so I had some talk time here. What's the hourly operating cost? Great question. We spent a considerable amount of time building out a model, diving into all the variable operating costs and the fixed operating costs. And the variable operating costs, which include fuel and maintenance and pilot overnighting or per diems or the like, are variable operating costs per hour about $1,000. Our fixed operating costs, which get into the actual salary compensation for pilots, for our chief pilot and other FAA 135 officers and the like, our fixed operating costs are about $300 per flight hour. And all told, total gross margin, our total fixed and variable operating costs about between $1,300 and $1,350 per flight hour.
So there's some easy questions. Are we pressurized? So we're pressurized. We go to 31,000 feet. You can fly above the weather when you need to. Typically, we won't be there. We'll be flying around as opposed to above. That's also the southeast weather pattern versus the northeast. Yes, 3,500 feet or less runways, short runways, thousands of them. It's a remarkable aircraft. I would encourage everybody to just watch the video. I can't do it justice. The video will give you a much better idea of the capability and safety features. And then the ride is phenomenal. It's got active control surfaces under computer control that really, even in gusty weather, give you a very solid ride, as does the carbon airframe. It punches way above its weight. It's an incredible experience. I would love to be able to fly with anyone who has interest, and we'll just show you the airplane.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for joining us and participating today. I will be following up with each of you separately by tomorrow. So any other questions you have, we will get you in direct contact with Steve and Richard. Again, thank you, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. Appreciate the support on this.